Hey, Greg Palast is joining us. Thanks for watching on ACT.tv. This is Waking Up. I'm Julianna Forlano. As promised, here he comes. Here he is. Hey, we made it to post-election.
Well, it's not post-election. The Senate is on the table.
There you go.
An election for you?
Wait, so I can't just relax and then later on feel better? No.
I canceled my vacation. I'm not letting you off the hook.
Yes, exactly. Greg Palast, we've had Greg on the show before. I think everyone who watches this show knows Greg Palast, knows his work. He's investigative reporter for the BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. He has several bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And don't forget the book that came out before the election actually happened, How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanquished Voters. Thanks for joining us on the program. It's great to have you here right in the middle of everything that's happening.
Yes. Well, of course, for 7 years, I've been concentrating on Georgia. People have wondered why. Well, back 7 years ago, I was visiting Martin Luther King III while his daughter, Martina King, was showed me her piano skills. And he said, Greg, Georgia's a blue state. They just have to let us vote. And us didn't mean the Proud Boys at the Trump rally that I saw. Mm-hmm. Yes. And there's me with Helen Butler. I see that you put on screen. Helen Butler is one of the great voting rights advocates in Georgia, heading the organization founded by by Reverend Lowry, Joe Lowry. And we sued the Secretary of State at the beginning of the year. This was originally Brian Kemp. And then, of course, I've sued him a couple times, Brian Kemp, to open up their files about how they are stealing elections. I just saw my good friend Bob Reich say that there was no fraud, yes, committed by voters, but there was a monstrous, horrible amount of fraud committed upon the voters.
Now, I know that you are an investigative journalist, but why the hell don't the Democrats say, actually, there was voter fraud on your end? Why don't they do that?
That's like asking a jellyfish why they don't stand up. There's a lack of a spine. I mean, I can't. You're asking me to crawl to the head of a Democrat small space and find out what's going on there. I don't know. I'm nonpartisan.
I mean, I'm the one who does it. I'm like, hello.
You're looking at Helen Butler. Okay, this year. In Georgia. So I've spent literally 7 years concentrating mainly on Georgia. And now the the other thing is, look, the Democratic Party is shocked that they won Georgia for Biden and that they now may win the 2 Senate seats. Of course, the Democratic Party is always shocked by real information.
By winning.
Well, part of it is that they just don't understand votes of people of color. This is a problem that all you have to do is take your knee off the neck of the voters, millions, and you'll do well. I mean, so the ACLU of Georgia issued a report of mine this year saying that the Republican Secretary of State had removed 198,000 voters from the voter rolls of Georgia illegally. That's almost 200,000 voters, overwhelmingly black voters and young voters. In other words, voters of color, the color being blue. Don't ask again why the Democrats aren't there. It doesn't matter. It's about I'm for the voters. It's not Democrats or Republicans. So 198,000 voters removed illegally. They've used every ugly trick in the book. And by the way, when you say Democrats don't act, I mean Stacey Abrams and a lot of Democrats have acted, but they're usually not of the pale face variety.
Well, they've done a good job. I mean, even with all of those voters being disenfranchised, Biden still won the state.
Well, yeah, and so did John Ossoff. The problem is that they aren't counting his ballots.
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
Okay, here's what's happening.
Tell us. Yeah.
Okay. Again, we're not talking about voters stealing the vote. That type of fraud, when Donald Trump says the election's rigged because voters are stealing it, he's correct that the election's rigged because his cronies are rigging it, not by people, mailing in votes from Venezuela. Or it was his son who said that that the ballots in Pennsylvania could have come from Mars. Not true. I checked. They don't sell postage stamps on Mars. You can't mail in your ballot from there. That's silliness. But the problem is we're getting distracted by Trump's silliness. There really was a massive attack on the vote in America this year. One of the worst I've seen in 20 years of these investigations for Rolling Stone and others. Remember my investigation for Rolling Stone and Democracy Now! We're focused to Georgia. It is the state where they take out these new Jim Crow tactics for a test drive. And that's where they really try out these things like these new mass purges. One where they say you've moved and you haven't. I did a couple little films. In fact,
we showed them here on the
program. Those were released by Leonardo DiCaprio. Thank you.
That was great.
DiCaprio's, and so millions of people have seen that, where you see Martin Luther King's cousin, 92 years old, thrown out of the polling station. I was there. I'm filming her.
Wow.
I didn't know that in advance.
That was pretty great. In terms of
in the one way footage. It's great because it exposed things and people are saying, "Oh, that's terrible." Well, it's not just Mrs. King's cousin. It's 198,000 others in her boat who were told, "Scram, you can't vote."
Greg, talk about your partnership with the ACLU to get the purged voters in Georgia back on the polls. Is that gonna put Jon Ossoff over the top?
Well, it did put Jon Ossoff over the top. Let me put it this way. I mean, that wasn't my goal. My goal is to get the voters to vote. But right. I worked with the key thing was once the ACLU issued my report and the list, we challenged the Secretary of State. We said, look, here's the list. We'll help you get the people back on. Well, let's straighten this out because you're violating federal law. Stay tuned for what we're going to do about the violation of the law. Stay tuned if he doesn't act. But the Black Voters Matter, which is headed by Latasha Brown, Cliff Albright, Black Voters Matter, sent out postcards to 98,000 people who were on that purge list before the last date for registration before the general election. Again, notice it wasn't the Democratic Party trying to get these black voters back on. I'm not going to, get into why. It doesn't matter.
Black people saying, we don't want to die from COVID, please. Could we get, can we get someone with a plan?
Yeah. So they sent out, so Black Voters Matter used our list and got to the voters. The Helen Butler and Southern Poverty Law Center were calling people. So the voting rights group put Jon Ossoff over the top. Now, what do I mean by that? I know he's heading into a runoff, as is the Reverend Warnock, who I know from the Ebenezer Baptist Church, took King's place. And he was in a three-way race. He was definitely going to a runoff under Georgia law. There was no way to avoid it. But in the case of Ossoff, how come he didn't just win? How could Biden win and not Ossoff? Well, because there's always a little bit of drop-off between president and senator. But what I'm finding, and I'm investigating that this morning, so I usually don't say what I'm working on, but I have to tell you, we're looking at a massive rejection of mail-in votes in Gwinnett County, which is part of Atlanta, which is made up of several counties. In Gwinnett County, 30% of mail-in ballots were thrown in the garbage. 30%, I say thrown in the garbage, they're rejected. And you just had Bob Rice say, oh, well, if you filled out your ballot with a Sharpie instead of a black or blue pen, don't worry, your ballot won't be thrown out in Arizona. Well, it will be thrown out in Georgia. It will be thrown out in New York and in most states, by the way. They use every little excuse. And keep in mind, in Gwinnett, almost all those ballots are Democratic. Even in the rural, generally Republican areas, the mail-in ballots are Democratic because the Democratic Party told people to write suicide notes. Mail-in ballots. You should never mail in a ballot, never go postal unless you absolutely have to for safety reasons. Because even before this election, about 22% of mail-in ballots were thrown in the garbage. That is rejected. That's according to the MIT Caltech study. This election, it's worse. I think we're looking at about a fourth to a third of ballots in battleground states being rejected. No one's talking about that. Biden, I'm tired of the pollsters saying that they were wrong. Schmucks, you were right.
Exactly. Right. I'm tired of that too. I'm tired of no one mentioning the voter fraud on the other side and the voter suppression, except for us.
And so what's happened is we've gotten so crazy about denying, saying that Trump is wrong by saying the election's rigged, that we forget the absolute stone cold provable fact that the election was rigged.
Exactly.
That Biden overcame the steal. I wrote a book. This year I wrote the book "How Trump Stole 2020." Hey guys, that was a pretty darn
accurate.
Quote. But even beyond, it looks like they're trying to steal, and they may get away with stealing the United States Senate. That ain't no joke.
Okay, wait. So for people who are just joining because Georgia's in the spotlight now, people are really paying attention to what's happening in Georgia. For people who are just joining, can you maybe give a slight bit of history about who is tossing, why they have such a robust voter disenfranchisement machinery that was already in place, and who is tossing all of these ballots?
Okay, very good.
How do they get that done?
Okay, so for those who've been following Greg Palast, since 2014, I've been investigating tricks by the Republican secretaries of state, who now these are the little bureaucrats, but they're politicians. They're political hacks who have been put in charge of our voting. We're the only nations, maybe besides Red China and Russia, where political party hacks run our elections and get to decide who to vote. And their big trick is called the purge. Every 2 years, these little guys, and almost all men, except for Catherine Harris back in 2000, she was the Secretary of State. They just erase people's names that they don't want on the voter rolls. I say, how can you do that? Well, it's very sophisticated operation these days. For example, they say people have moved. Well, if you've left Atlanta, you can't live in it. You can't vote in Atlanta. That's why. But then I went down to Atlanta to meet with the voters who supposedly had moved and lost their vote, including that was again Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin voting at the same voting station for half a century. Now, so I checked it out. I went to the house that they said she moved out of. There's Martin Luther King's picture on the wall, having dinner with her in that house, proof that she's been there 60 years. And so they removed 198,000 voters illegally that they said had moved. Now, understand, they've been doing this for years in Georgia, suppressing the black vote, the Hispanic vote, and by the way, especially the Asian American vote. And when I first got this information, because remember, you see the hat, I'm an investigative reporter. I was working with Rolling Stone and Al Jazeera back in 2014, and I took this information to get a comment first from the guy who did it, Brian Kemp, who is now the governor. He got
the governorship by stealing it.
He removed so many black voters.
Yeah.
Are you ready? He removed 1/3 voters from the voter rolls, 1/3, and he won by like 50,000 votes. So I took it to. So I took this list of illegally removed voters. I showed the evidence to way before that election, years before the election, to the Democratic leader in Georgia, a woman named Stacey Abrams. And by the way, I put Stacey Abrams on national TV for the very first time on Democracy Now! And I said, look at this stuff. And she was totally freaked out. She says, Brian Kemp is like spending his time removing voters. That's a violation. His job is to protect voters. I said, well, welcome to Georgia. And now she'd already been fighting this guy. Don't think that I started Stacey Abrams off on the path of protecting voters. The reason I had met her, I was at the Ebenezer Baptist Church with, ironically, Reverend Warnock. And they were saying, look, we registered 50,000 voters 6 months ago. They've never added their names to the voter rolls. 50,000, almost all of it were young black and Hispanic voters whose names they'd gathered at universities. They never added them to the voter rolls. And then, by the way, before the 2016 election, there was a group called the 10,000 Koreans Vote. I went to go meet with them. They had gathered 10,000 Koreans Vote. They were trying to get Korean American voters. So they, of course, you have to register 10,000 Korean voters, Korean American voters, if they're going to vote. So they registered about half. They put in their registrations, and guess what? They never got entered onto the voter rolls. This is a new GOP trick.
So this isn't just like one guy in the post office tossing people. This is a big, organized, well-organized purge of voters that requires many hands on deck, not just Brian Kemp.
Yes, and in fact, the important thing is that while Kemp was, or first of all, Kemp doesn't have the brain cells. He's like Trump. There's not enough brain cells to pull this off. This is directed by a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas. If you can't remember that name, think KKK. Chris Kobach of Kansas. He was the Secretary of State there. By the way, Yale, Harvard, and Oxford degrees. He's no fool. He designed a lot of these purge systems. The first one being called Interstate crosscheck, and it's brilliant because what he did was he said, well, we're going to go after all the people who are registered in 2 states because they could commit a crime voting in 2 states. You go to jail. It's a felony. So how many suspects were there? I got his little secret list, 7.2 million voters accused of voting twice. And believe me, as every organizer said, it's hard enough to get people to vote once, let alone twice. And so I checked it out. So when I looked at the list, I had experts go, they said, what do you mean? This is just a list of common names. I'm not making this up. In Georgia, where they really put down the hammer with this list, in Georgia, they found 567 guys named James Brown. Believe it or not. And believe it or not, they found James Brown in Detroit, and they found a James Brown in Baltimore. They said they're all the same James Brown, even though almost none of them, I kid you not, have the same middle name. It's all different middle names. Wow. And they said, obviously, so here's the trick. Ready? Excuse me. It's I'm in LA, it's still smog. So what the trick is that 85 of the 100 most common surnames in America are minority names. Rodriguez, Johnson, Kim, Ho, Garcia, and even names such as the few white-ish names like Smith, Will Smith and stuff, because of the history of slavery. If you're using common names to determine if people are voting twice and you ignore their middle names, literally ignore them, you're going to remove a lot of guys named Jose Garcia. You're going to remove a lot of guys named James Brown.
Greg,
Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, all over, Ohio. That's why these states were flipping back red.
So I could just tell my friends who freaked out and are constantly depressed by watching MSNBC that the reason that they don't need to be depressed is it's not really a 50-50 election. It's a 50-50 election with at least a third of the voting population in some of these swing states suppressed and unable to vote. Is that fairly accurate?
You have we generally calculate, and we're pretty good at this. Because I've been in 20 years, I'm a statistician by training. And we have usually about a 4% steal. This is about 6%. I mean, that might sound small when you use that number, but that's millions. That you're talking. Usually the steal is 5 to 6 million. It was about 8 to 9 million this year. Wow. I mean, it's mind-boggling the number of voters who have been removed in Michigan. People wonder, how could Michigan be close? How could Hillary have lost it? Now Biden almost lost it. The answer is that they removed 313,000 voters, almost all of them black and young voters, from the voter rolls of Michigan before this election. 1/3 voters. And so, no, the polls weren't wrong in Michigan. Biden did have a walk away. He did. And the Democratic senator who barely squeaked through, he didn't squeak. The polls weren't wrong. It's just that if, for example, I've never heard of pollsters ask, were you given a provisional ballot? Most of those are thrown out. They say, who'd you vote for? They didn't say, did your vote count? Because you don't know.
Right.
So, like, for example, if you were given a provisional ballot, you think you voted, but you haven't. And
it's ridiculous. I'm sorry. When I watch the TV and they're saying, like, I don't know how the polls could be so wrong. And then they just let it lie there without actually looking into it and reporting on it, which is something that you do, which we are eternally grateful for you for. What can our viewers do to continue to ensure that Georgia voters remain on the polls and are free of Jim Crow style voter suppression, especially, before the 5th of we got the 5th. It's a very important date.
The most important date for Georgia is December 7th, D-Day. December 7th is the last day you can register to vote in Georgia, or re-register. And what I'm asking people to do, please go to gregpalast.com will hook you through to the sites where you can see if you are on the Georgia purge list. If you know anyone in Georgia, tell them they have to check their registration. They go to gregpalast.com, or but even better, frankly, is the Secretary of State's website. I know he wants to remove you, but that's where you can re-register online till December 7th. And please do not re-register on a piece of paper and mail it in or any of that stuff. Please register online. Don't vote online, register online.
Greg, will they have the I mean, obviously they know that, people who want democracy and Democrats are going to try to get everyone to vote and everyone to register. I'm assuming that is there evidence that their efforts to deregister people are ramping up as well?
No, I think I have to be very careful. I don't want to say that they won't pull a stunt like that, because I've seen it done before in Florida in 2000. I'm the one who caught Catherine Harris just before the election, removing 58,000 black men from the voter rolls, calling them felons. And they weren't. Right. And, but I don't think that they'll get away with that this time. But the thing is, most people who have been purged from the voter rolls, you don't know it. Mrs. Jordan, the 92-year-old, Raheem Shabazz, Ashley Jones, they didn't know in advance when they walked into the polling station that they could no longer vote. So please, anyone you know in Georgia, if you're listening from Georgia, you check your registration right now. Please don't tell me you've had no problems for the past 30 years. I don't care. All those people in tears, literally in tears because they couldn't vote, didn't know that they'd been removed from the voter registries. Check your registration. If it's missing, if the information on it is wrong, you correct it. And whatever you do, please don't go postal. The only reason Georgia was saved for the voters, I'm not talking about for the Democrats, I'm talking about saved for the voters. And the voters were saved because African-American leadership said, don't mail in your ballot. Again, 30% of ballots in Gwinnett County, Atlanta, were rejected that were mailed in. We're looking to find out what's happened in the other counties. Don't do it. You'd stand a big chance of not having your ballot counted for all kinds of tech reasons. I know it's difficult. You're going to have to stand in line for early voting. So, and by the way, the good thing about early voting is that if you go in most times of the day, it's very little or no lines. So that's the trick. Bring your mask, bring your gloves, bring your sanitizer, and maybe
when does early voting start there? Do you know?
Yeah. Bring 2 lawyers with you too. December 14th. Okay. Registration.
Wow.
December 7th. D-Day, December 14th.
Christmas would be, they're probably closed. But I was going to say Christmas Eve, no one's going to be voting. There'd be no line on that day. I
think there will be voting on Christmas Eve. So,
you can do it, but that would be a great day to do it if you have. If you really didn't want any line. Santa
and the deer and all that stuff, because they're definitely
Santa's been purged.
He's definitely.
Greg Palast, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We, I appreciate everything that you've done to make sure voting in this country is fair and that people can actually do it and participate in the democratic process. Right here, we've got the thing right here. Georgia runoff elections. Here's the deadlines. Right now, request your ballot. December 7th is the voter registration deadline. Even more important than that, go on right now if you already think that you're already all good for voting there, even if you just voted last week or 2 weeks ago, go and do it again. Make sure your registration is still there. January 5th is the deadline to postmark mailed ballots, but Greg suggests highly that you get in line starting December 14th and vote in early voting in Georgia.
And if you have to mail it in, please do it right now. Give yourself enough time and check over your ballot seriously several times.
And don't do it with a Sharpie.
Black pen, blue pen, no lipstick, pencils, or chocolate to mark the ballot.
I wonder if they're having meetings over at the Sharpie Corporation to be like, is this good for us? Is this not good? They have to be having sales force meetings. Greg Palast, thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Julianna. Bye.
We'll be watching what happens with the next election. I can't believe there's one coming up so quickly. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks everyone for watching.